Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to the City of Toronto's COVID-19 media briefing for Wednesday, July the 8th, 2020. Joining us today, Mayor John Tory and Toronto's Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Eileen de Villa. Mayor Tory.
Brad, thank you and good afternoon. First of all, may I say thank you to the city staff, to the police, fire and hydro for their efforts in dealing with today's flooding. It's the latest severe summer storm. I think the first one we've really had this year with this kind of flooding, and they're doing their very best, especially in areas of the downtown and the northwest of the city, which seem to have had a storm stall over that area to help with all the different dislocation it's caused for people. The federal government today updated all of us on the fiscal outlook for the country. Canada, of course, is being faced with a large deficit as a result of the ongoing pandemic. This does not come as any surprise. The federal government has moved quickly to offer supports and services to residents and businesses across the country, including here in Toronto, and those measures have been very effective in helping people and businesses manage the impact of COVID-19. Whether it's programs like the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, CERB, for employees, the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy for businesses, or supports for vulnerable people, these are necessary programs that have helped Canadians get through the pandemic. But they all came at a cost. No one ever tried to obscure that reality. I think it was a good shock absorber for the country, but it's obvious that these outlays will have implications for all of us for some time to come. That is not lost on me or on my colleagues here at the City of Toronto. And so I want to thank the federal government for the activities they've undertaken so far to help protect people and mitigate against the effects of COVID-19. I think this has been helpful to Torontonians, it's been helpful to large and smaller businesses, and it's been helpful to Canadians right across the country. For our part, what we take from today's statement is that the best thing we can do is to get people back to work, to make sure that we support businesses in every way possible and get them open again as soon as possible and to the greatest extent possible within the context of public health, to get the economy going so that people can then resume their own receipt of their own income and thus reduce their dependence on government, also get their incomes going again, both business and people, so they can pay tax and help the government's revenues federally and provincially to recover. I would point out that all of this kind of recovery requires good, solid city services, things like transit, things like childcare, the kinds of supports people need delivered at the grassroots in a municipality across the country, but here in Toronto as well, on a much larger scale, so that they can then take their full and productive place in the economy. And that is why it continues to be important that we seek and receive support from the other governments with respect to the revenue shortfall we've had. It was very interesting to see in the minister's statement today in Ottawa. He indicated that the federal government had fallen into the shortfall that it has 20% based on lost revenues, but 80% based on increased expenditures, the kinds of investments that have helped people and businesses. In the municipal case, it is exactly the opposite. 20% of our shortfall that we have, which, as you know, is approaching $2 billion so far for this year, estimate for the end of the year, 20% is from increased costs and 80% is from lost revenues. And those lost revenues don't come back. People are not going to ride the transit system twice in August when they didn't ride it at all in April. And so those revenues are, as it were, gone for good. And that puts a big onus on us to get the help we need in order to stabilize our own finances and to make sure we can continue to provide the services that people need. I didn't expect there would be an announcement today with respect to the federal participation in the help for municipalities across the country, including Toronto. In fact, they reiterated what I called their very first step that they took before they had embarked on discussions with the provinces, which are ongoing. And I guess the point that I would make again today in the wake of the minister's statement is that it is fine that they're having discussions. That is a welcome thing. It is customary in this country to have those kinds of federal-provincial negotiations, but time's up. We need help now for cities so that we can get people back to work, so that we can get our businesses going again, so that we can provide the basic services people need in order to open businesses and get back to work, like transit, like childcare, keeping the city safe, making sure we look after the roads and the parks, and so on. And so I want to thank the federal government for being great partners in this pandemic thus far, and say now I believe that the task for us turns to fashioning with the provinces an appropriate package to help cities and towns. I want to also thank Premier Ford, who again today reiterated his steadfast commitment to helping municipalities and to working with the federal government to get that done. And my message conveyed to him, together with my thanks, is time's up as well on that. And I think if they together could reach an agreement, that would be very well received by us. Now, our rebuild and recovery plans have resulted in a more unique and innovative approach to delivering city services, and this is some of the good news that can come from a crisis. I'm excited today to announce an online application system for business owners to complete new licensing and permit applications online. For some in the private sector and elsewhere, this will come as no big news, but the government has been operating under a system that the city government, where people had to go to the East York Civic Centre to get all manner of new licenses, and we now have a virtual solution that keeps people safe in terms of their having to go outside of their business or home to get these licenses, makes it more convenient for them, and allows them to do it at any time of the day or night. This requires people to fill out an application, submit documentation, and complete payment in one convenient online space. Businesses can apply for almost all licenses and permits, with very few exceptions. For example, private transportation companies, payday loan establishments, short-term rental companies. These people are still required to show up in person to fill out some of their paperwork and be questioned by some of the authorities. But once an application is filled out for many of the rest, people can expect contact from municipal licensing and standards within 3 business days to sort out any remaining questions, and the license would then be issued. And that can be done in a further 3 days. So this is much more convenient and relatively fast in the context of the speed with which business requires this kind of cooperation. If there are issues, there are also people that are available in person to help by telephone or otherwise, and this is a completely secure option that safely stores the information that people file with the civic government. Licensing staff will be available to talk to people, and of course there will continue to be an option to go to the East York Civic Centre if you wish to do so. The other thing about this that I should note is that it happened, like a lot of things over the course of the pandemic, at what I call wartime speed. We used to be told quite often, and I'm not being critical in saying this, that it would take years, months, hearings, consultations, and all kinds of different things to get something like this done. But this was done during the course of the pandemic at wartime speed, and I'm grateful to the staff for their efforts in that regard, because this was something done in weeks, not years, which has often been the case. And I look forward to having more of these ideas to share with you as we proceed further. Today represents 2 weeks from the entering of Stage 2 by the City of Toronto. And in the 2 weeks of reopening, we've made great strides to reopen the city and to ensure that residents have access to more services across the city. And that includes Cafe TO, for example, where we received thus far 774 Cafe TO registrations, and we continue to work with local operators to safely roll out more of those expanded patios, and in some cases new patios that are meant to give those proprietors of those restaurants and bars a fighting chance for more revenue. 550 of those applications have been approved, and others are pending approval very shortly. And that includes the installation of 28 curb lane patios that support 60 different businesses, and an additional 97 sidewalk patio expansions already provided for. Temporary bike lanes have been installed along major streets such as Bloor Street, University Avenue, and Dundas Street East. Camp TO has received more than 16,000 registrations for a program which had a COVID-required redesign done in just a matter of a couple of weeks. 57 outdoor pools are open. Extended pool hours are in place at 8 pools during the heat warnings. 140 splash pads are open. 10 city lifeguard supervised swimming beaches. Although I should say to people, we're going to be requiring more of you in terms of cooperating with us on not having fires and not causing overcrowding situations to occur for public health reasons. We've reopened public ferry access to Toronto Island Park with some restrictions, reopened 11 Toronto early learning and childcare services, and we supported the reopening of 322 licensed childcare programs, with a further 12 reopening very shortly. So this is all good news, and it's not the full list, but it does demonstrate our steadfast response to COVID-19 and to the innovative ways that we're responding to the needs of businesses and residents, and our steadfast determination to get the city reopened within the context of keeping people safe and healthy at the same time. And so we will continue to move forward with our reopening plan so that residents can enjoy and have access to all of the city's services. I wanted also just to provide a short update with regard to the digital Main Street and Shop Here programs, because I think the success of these programs as a bit of an economic buffer and economic help to our business community has been very significant. The city launched Digital Main Street in 2016 to help businesses get online and embrace technology, and since then, more than 7,000 businesses have been supported by that program. And as COVID-19 took hold, obviously moving online became even more important as businesses were required to be closed, and this helped to stop the bleeding on Main Street. Since COVID-19, Digital Main Street has helped over 1,000 businesses to make the switch to get themselves selling and marketing online. And one example of this is a business called Sweet Thrills in Roncesvalles. Their business was already online, but they needed to find customers during the course of the pandemic. It's fine to be online, but if nobody knows you're there, then it's going to be a problem. Digital Main Street team showed up, taught their owner, Marianne Racco, to run her own Facebook and Instagram ads to drive traffic to her online store, and she's never looked back. Another vital program launched by the city together with Digital Main Street was something called Shop Here. This program took businesses from an idea to a launch of an e-commerce store, an active online store, within 2 weeks, and it brought together Shopify, Google, Facebook, and MasterCard to help build online stores for small businesses and artists at no cost to themselves. Since its launch less than 2 months ago, this program has built online stores for more than 3,000 small businesses and artists in the City of Toronto. Again, a remarkable accomplishment for a program that didn't even exist a couple of months ago. And a lot of these online stores were created with the help of volunteer, student, web artists, and others who came forward to help us. 1,000 web volunteers volunteered to assist, many of them from Toronto, but there were also volunteers that came from 27 other countries, not an unusual story in Toronto. But again, it was Toronto Tech coming together to support other people in the business community who needed help, and that preserved and created jobs and made it easier for a Main Street Toronto that was really struggling. That one, the Shop Here program, the Purple Penguin Cafe in Leslieville worked with Digital Main Street and Shop Here to build their online store to sell their baked goods online. And it was critical to allow them, when they couldn't open their physical store, to have some of their product still sold online and keep people employed, of course. While embracing technology has always been important for small businesses, COVID-19 has accelerated that need, and fortunately these programs, sponsored by the City of Toronto and joined in by some of the very distinguished partners that I made reference to, have helped our small business community during this crisis. And again, that's an example of how we will continue to help people and businesses in the city as we reopen and recover from this nightmare, and as we follow the advice of Dr. de Villa, our medical officer of health, which will stop us from slipping back into a shutdown kind of mode. And so on that note, I'll ask Dr. de Villa if she will give her report for today.
Thank you, Mayor Tory, and good afternoon. Over the past 2 days, there have been 57 new COVID-19 infections in Toronto. To date, 12,935 people have recovered, an increase of 91 since Monday. As always, for more detailed data on the status of COVID-19 cases in our city, I encourage you to visit our website. I'm pleased to share that when we look overall at our data trend, our new COVID-19 case reports continue to remain low. There is also some good news in our COVID-19 monitoring dashboard update. Today, while our overall status continues to be yellow, our healthcare capacity category has gone back to an overall green status as a result of a decline in our acute care bed occupancy rate indicator. I wanted to also acknowledge improvements in the province's lab processing indicators, which are the highest they've been since we started monitoring. The proportion of new COVID-19 tests that the provincial lab processes within 48 hours has now improved to 77%. This moves this indicator from red to yellow. I would like to extend my thanks and acknowledgement to our provincial colleagues for their hard work, which is reflected in the progress they have made in these lab processing times. As we conduct deeper dives into our data, we will be able to better determine what data are actionable, and how we can get ourselves ready for future COVID-19 activity, given what we have seen in other jurisdictions that are a little ahead of us in their COVID-19 outbreaks. We know that it is this kind of data and this kind of data analysis that will actually make a difference to us as a city, and it is what best protects us and the health of the residents of this city. Yesterday marked the first day of our city's new mask bylaw, which requires us to wear masks or face coverings in indoor public settings in our city. This is an important step in helping our city to continue to safely reopen. As we look to the experiences of other jurisdictions, this gives us more reason to promote the use of masks. When we keep our germs from others by wearing a mask, we help reduce virus spread, and we strengthen our ability to get our city back. This is especially important because we know that people can spread the virus to others before they have symptoms. We also might not know if the people around us have a mother, father, or other loved one who is battling an illness or has a chronic condition that makes them more vulnerable to COVID-19. We all want our city and our local businesses to thrive, and we want people in our community to be healthy. Wearing a mask is a simple and inexpensive action we can all take to take care of each other and to do our part to keep us moving forward towards stage 3 of reopening. Our goal throughout this pandemic has been to save lives, to protect our healthcare system capacity, and to minimize the social, economic, and broader health impact of COVID-19 on our city. Wearing a mask is an action that we can all take to contribute to these goals. This is why I'm so pleased to see so many people taking the responsible action, wearing masks in our city. Thank you. Remember, as I have shared before, I wear my mask to protect you, and you wear your mask to protect me. Lastly, the extreme heat is expected to continue in our city. And with this in mind, I encourage residents to cool down at one of the city's many outdoor pools and splash pads that are now open. Please remember to practice physical distancing and stay 6 feet away from others. If you are heading outside, consider planning doing this during the cooler parts of the day, and please remember to drink plenty of water to stay hydrated. Lastly, please keep taking care of each other by calling or texting family, friends, or neighbors living alone to make sure that they are staying hydrated and keeping cool. And with that, I'll now turn it back over to Brad.
Thank you, Dr. de Villa. Staff on the line to answer any questions include Mary Ann Bedard from Shelter Support Housing, Carlton Grant from Municipal Licensing and Standards, Barbara Gray from Transportation Services, Janie Romoff from Parks, Forestry and Recreation, and Paul Raftis from Senior Services and Long-Term Care. The first question is from Brian Passafume at the Toronto Sun. Brian, go ahead, please.
Good afternoon, Brad. Good afternoon. First question is for the mayor. The inhabitants of the protest camp at Nathan Phillips Square were ordered to vacate Monday, but they seem to be digging in their heels and staying put. What's the city's plan on dealing with this? And have you met with the organizers to discuss any of the concerns?
The city's officials have been meeting extensively and repeatedly with the people that are camping on Nathan Phillips Square, which is contrary to the law, but they're engaged in protest. And I can only tell you that they've been made aware, they've been served the requisite legal notices, they've been given a letter outlining the areas in which they are in violation of the law, and that we have indicated to them we will be taking action before too long to see that they locate elsewhere if they don't locate themselves elsewhere. So I'll say no more than that for this time.
Okay. second question is, I don't think any reasonable person would disagree with any of their concerns, particularly the ongoing and sad legacy of systemic racism experienced by both Black and Indigenous Canadians. However, some are telling us that they're perceiving a bit of a double standard at play when it comes to robust enforcement of social distancing, mandatory mask bylaws, etc., and what appears to be the city's endorsement of what's essentially an illegal occupation of the square. How do you respond to those observations?
I respond to comments like that by saying simply this. In my job, in the job of the city officials, in the job of the police for that matter, all of us have a responsibility to balance what the law says in black and white as against people's legitimate right to protest, and that you have to try to do your best, I think, in every circumstance, and it's a lesson that we have to learn in many areas and do better to achieve a peaceful resolution to these kinds of things, recognizing that camping in the square, for example, is not legal. And so we've had ongoing discussions. We've exchanged legal documentation to indicate that we're serious about the need for them to remove themselves from the square. It can't go on indefinitely. I've said that repeatedly. But at the same time, we've also tried very hard to have constructive discussions with them aimed at arriving at a removal of this encampment from the Nathan Phillips Square on a voluntary basis. So we will see how that goes on. I've said many times it won't go on forever, it can't go on forever, it mustn't go on forever, but we've been engaged in those discussions, but we're not going to let it go on forever.
Okay, thank you. We go next to Jennifer Pagliaro from the Toronto Star. Jen, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Brad. First question might be for Carlton or whoever is able to answer. I'm just wondering, when it comes to Patio and patios being open, I know in the past folks here have said that it's difficult, obviously, to enforce these sort of citywide policies that are being put in place for the duration of the pandemic. But I wonder, are there people checking on the standards at patios? Are you getting complaints about patios not being set up at appropriate distances, and how are you planning on dealing with that?
Carlton, could you address that, please?
Yeah, I'll start, and if Barbara wants to jump in, that's fine.
Sure, thank you.
We are receiving complaints about patios, but not necessarily about their configuration. It's more about large gatherings or by noise or amplified sound or singing or dancing. We will, as a combination, respond to complaints that we get from the public, and we're working with transportation services, public health, and our own officers to proactively be out there and monitoring how the patios are being set up so far. But so far, we've had very limited issues.
Barbara, can you add to that?
Yeah, I would just, I would underscore what Carlton said, that our teams are working together, our standards officers, to do proactive patrols in the streetscape areas where we put down patios, and we'll continue to monitor to ensure that the information on public health and physical distancing, that we're not seeing overcrowding, but also that the patio setups themselves are staying in the places that they were assigned to be.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And just on a different topic, Mayor Tory, I wanted to ask you about some comments the Premier made. He was asked about the funding issue and the comments from you and other leaders that time is up. He mentioned, as I think you have, that he speaks with you daily, but he says that the federal government, he doesn't think is calling large urban mayors, and he's really placing the blame on what he says holding up this deal on them. I'm just wondering if you can respond to that.
It's the old expression, it takes two to tango, so it's not up to me to assess blame. It's up to me simply to say that the two of them, meaning the federal government and the provincial government, have to come to an agreement. And I think they're both of a mind, based on my conversations repeatedly with the Premier and with the Deputy Prime Minister and others in the federal government, to just determine to themselves, at least in the case of Ontario, I've always said if Ontario has to go it alone as the biggest province in the country representing some of the biggest cities, that's what they should do, and strike a deal with the federal government. And if the other provinces want to follow along or not, that's entirely up to them. But I know we need the help. I know we, through the provincial government, would accept the help, and that they would get together. So, the dance goes on, but I think it's one of those, situations where the dance has to end very, very soon. And I would be optimistic and hopeful that we would get a deal, maybe this week. I'll extend that through to Sunday, but time is marching on. We have a report that we have in preparation at the city that outlines things that have to be done in the consequence of no deal being reached or no meaningful assistance being provided. I don't think that's going to be the outcome, but I think it is time for somebody to make the next move on this, and I know the Premier's been very steadfast in advocating on our behalf and on behalf of our own province, so I thank him for that, and we'll see where it goes.
Okay, thank you. Final question is to Melissa Melissa from City News.
Hi, my question is in regards to Cafe Tio. Now, we've heard from some frustrated business owners who are awaiting Cafe Tio approval, some of which say if they wait any longer, they could lose their business. At what point do you expect to approve locations that haven't been approved just yet, and is there a timeline?
Well, there were a number of locations which had the need for a provincial order to be passed to permit these patios to be put on private property. But if you even take those out and then you look at the fact that 550 out of 700 and some odd applications have been approved in a very short period of time, a matter of a very short number of weeks, I think we're doing quite well. I know the story that I did see on City TV last night that concerned one particular patio, but to be candid, based on the information I have, they had proceeded to build their patio out into the curb lane without the proper authorizations, and that led to as I understand it, the complaints that are coming from that area of town. And I'm sorry about that, because those are two establishments that deserve every chance to have the extra space in place and to make the extra money that's going to help them to survive. But you also have to follow the rules, and certainly after I inquired about it, I was told that every effort was being made to get that application dealt with as quickly as possible and get those permits issued. So Barbara may wish to pick up on that, but I will just say that I commend our staff for working well with the BIAs and with the individual restaurants and bars at getting more than 500 permits issued with lightning speed for a program that didn't exist again 2 months ago. So Barbara, do you want to add to that?
Sure, I'd be happy to, and I think it's important to note that in addition to the applications being vetted and approved, there's also the piece of having to go out and actually physically put down the curb lane installations. And our operations and maintenance staff are working pretty much 7 days a week to try to get everything laid out within the next 2 weeks. We understand that patio season is short, but there's lots of work to be done in order to make sure that everybody is up and running. So we are working very diligently. We have a lot of staff across the city that are working to ensure that we're helping to support the businesses as best we can, and continue to move as quickly as we can on their behalf.
I should also add that, aside from one particular area, we've had very, very few complaints, and in fact a lot of compliments about the speed with which this has been done, recognizing that in some cases there are complications involved in this just because of curb lanes that have to be closed, or because of the configuration of patios to allow for a sidewalk, pedestrians to still proceed and that kind of thing. But I think it's been done by and large with record speed, and we waived all the fees associated with it, and so I think this has been a boon, certainly to the 500 people who have their permits and to the many patios that are already open.
Follow-up, Melissa?
Sure, but for the 200 others that are still waiting, do you have a goal date in mind as to when you're hoping for all of this to be approved?
Well, let's remember, the Cafe Tio patios were not allowed to be open before July the 1st. And that's not any reason to slow down the processing of applications now, and there is no slowdown. It's being done as quickly as possible. But they've only been allowed to be open for a week, and many, many are open, as I outlined today. We are proceeding ahead to do not only the approval process, but also the installation of what's required to keep people safe as quickly as possible. So the idea is not to say a date a week or a month from now, it's to say that the idea is to do it as soon as possible, which means days, so that people can have the advantage of the rest of the summer to make up the revenue that they've lost during the entire time of the shutdown. So we're working as hard as we can. I think it's very isolated instances that are bogged down in any kind of bureaucratic inertia, and in some cases that's because people didn't follow the established process. So I think the city staff, this is a case where I will defend them to the hilt as having done a very excellent, complicated, widespread job in a short period of time and done it very well.
Okay, thank you. That concludes today's briefing. The next briefing will be on Monday, July 13th at 2 p.m. So please note that time change, 2 p.m. next Monday, July 13th. Thank you, everybody, and have a safe weekend.